You didn't find this by chance. Something quieter, older, and far more deliberate than coincidence has brought you here. Tonight, the noise of the day is softening. Maybe you're in your room with the lights dimmed. Maybe there's a window open and the night air is moving gently across your skin. Wherever you are, let your shoulders drop, your breath slow, and your attention settle. This is your pause in the timeline. Before we begin, subscribe so you can return when the world feels too loud, and check in with yourself. Notice where you are, the time on the clock, and the way this moment feels. What you're about to hear isn't a lecture or a list of rules, but a remembering of a self beneath the self, a deeper intelligence woven into your awareness, waiting for you to step into it. The patterns you've felt, the flickers you've noticed, the way life sometimes tilts toward the extraordinary. All of it has been leading here. Now we begin. You didn't stumble here. You aligned. Without fully knowing it, your awareness made a choice long before your body clicked or your eyes settled on this screen. Something within you leaned forward, not out of curiosity alone, but out of recognition. There is a kind of message that doesn't announce itself with volume, but with vibration. It hums below the noise, beneath distraction, beneath the routines that disguise themselves as life. And only those attuned to that subtle hum, those who have started noticing the irregular rhythms beneath their regular days, can feel when something is calling. Not forward in time, but inward. That call is why you're here. And even if you think you were just scrolling, even if you've told yourself a dozen stories about randomness, somewhere deeper in you, you already know this isn't random. This is resonance, a meeting not between words and reader, but between frequency and frequency. There is an old intelligence within you, not the kind that recites facts, but the kind that senses before you can explain. That intelligence has been watching quietly, waiting for you to notice the odd patterns, the repeating numbers, the dreams that linger too long, the strange synchronicities that make your logic short-circuit. And if you're being honest, you've been seeing them more often lately. These aren't glitches. These are invitations, echoes, gentle pulses from a version of you that already exists beyond the fog. Not the future you hope to become, but the version that has always been underneath, like a frequency waiting for you to finally tune in. What if this version of you didn't need to be built, but uncovered? What if everything that felt like breaking was actually dismantling? You've mistaken some of your deepest shifts as failures, but they were fractures in a shell that was never yours to carry. The anxiety wasn't malfunction, it was awakening. The discontent wasn't weakness, it was memory. You weren't falling apart. You were being unwrapped. You're not broken. You're blooming. But slowly, deliberately, like a signal strengthening through static. That's why it's felt uneven. Why some days you feel electric with purpose, and others hollow and confused. You're not inconsistent. You're calibrating. You've been shedding skins that were stitched together from survival, approval, ambition, performance, protection. They served you once, but now you're vibrating beyond them. And even though the world keeps asking you to return to your old frequency, to explain, to justify, to shrink, something in you refuses. You can't unknow what you've started to see. You can't untaste this frequency. You've outgrown the lie that your worth is earned. You've begun to remember it's embodied. Coherence isn't something you chant into place. It's something your body knows. The truth is, your nervous system has been trying to speak to you in ways your mind never learned to listen to. That tightening in your chest when you're around certain people, that's data. That heaviness in your belly when you silence yourself, that's guidance. You've been interpreting your emotions as interruptions instead of translations. But emotion is just energy moving with message. It's not there to derail you. It's there to realign you. Every time you feel off, you're not failing. You're being invited to return to your original tone. This isn't about fixing yourself. This is about feeling yourself deeply, fully, without performance, without narrative, just pure noticing. And from that noticing comes the shift, not through force, but through frequency. And most magnetic people aren't trying. They're tuning. The most powerful transformations aren't planned. They're allowed. And the version of you you keep trying to become isn't ahead of you in time. It's orbiting you now, waiting not to be chased, but matched. So what changes when? You stop chasing everything. You stop sprinting towards some imagined success and start listening to what's alive within you right now. You stop asking for signs and start noticing how you've already become one. You stop praying for miracles and start becoming a condition where miracles are normal. And not because you learned the right method, but because you stopped hiding. You dropped the tone that wasn't yours. And your real frequency, the one you buried under expectations and conditioning, began to hum again. At first, it was faint. Just a moment of peace in the middle of the chaos. A conversation that felt like home. A breath that somehow tasted like belonging. But over time, those moments began to string together, forming a new rhythm. One your nervous system recognized. One your cells began dancing to, even before your mind had language for it. That's where you are now. Somewhere between forgetting and fully remembering. Between surviving and embodying. Between running and receiving. Here's the strange part. The more you allow, the more reality bends. Not in dramatic explosions, but in gentle tilts. You think of someone, and they message. You ask a question, and the answer walks into your day. You release a fear, and suddenly the world softens around you. This isn't coincidence. This is coherence. This is what happens when your inner world starts resonating with the field that holds everything, every possibility, every version of you, every timeline you've glimpsed in dreams. You're not scripting your future. You're stabilizing it. Like tuning a radio, you don't control the signal by force. You align your dial. And suddenly, what felt like static becomes symphony. Not because the music changed, but because you did. But even symphonies need silence, stillness, rest. There's a reason you've been feeling tired, not just physically, but soul tired. You're not lazy. You're integrating. Your cells are rearranging. Your breath is learning how to move without defense. Your energy is no longer leaking into roles that never fit. And that exhaustion? That's the weight of unlearning. Don't rush it. You don't bloom faster by pulling the petals open. You deepen by softening, by trusting that alignment isn't something you achieve. It's something you become. And every time you pause, really pause, you allow more of that becoming to emerge. Not because you tried harder, but because you remembered that what you're becoming isn't separate from who you are. Even now, something in you is nodding, quietly, internally, not out of agreement, but out of recognition. This isn't new information. It's ancient. It's the pulse of your essence, speaking in the only language that never needed translation. Energy. You've known this all along, haven't you? Not in words, but in waves, in dreams, in that strange feeling you get when you look at the stars too long. In the way your body sometimes feels like it's remembering something your mind forgot. That's not imagination. That's memory. Not of your past, but of your potential. And it's not just yours. It's collective. There is a wave rising, subtle but undeniable, of people tuning out of noise and into knowing. And you, simply by listening, have already become part of it. And maybe you still don't know what happens next. That's okay. Maybe you don't have a clear plan. That's okay. What matters is that you've turned toward the signal, that you've decided even in small ways, to stop pretending you're less than you are. That you've started treating your attention like sacred currency. That you've stopped explaining your intuition to people who only speak logic. That you've allowed quiet to be enough. That is the beginning of coherence. And coherence is the beginning of reality bending around truth, not the world's truth, but yours. The one you've been carrying like a seed through storms. The one that's finally starting to bloom. There comes a moment, quiet, not announced, where you no longer crave explanation. Not because you've stopped seeking, but because you've started remembering. That's the shift. You go from looking for answers in the world outside to listening for echoes inside your own presence. And when you make that shift, even slightly, you begin to notice how different the world responds. Not immediately, not always obviously, but unmistakably. It becomes less about trying to control life and more about stabilizing the state you occupy while it unfolds. There's a frequency within you, one that predates your name, your roles, your wounds. And that frequency doesn't rise from belief. It rises from coherence. You don't need to convince the universe of your worthiness. You just need to stop arguing with it. Every time you pause to feel the truth of your being without defending it, you reinforce a kind of energetic structure, one the world begins to recognize, one reality bends around. Because when your nervous system relaxes into truth, not performance, it becomes a tuning fork for everything that matches that truth. And that's when life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a mirror that keeps clearing. Not to flatter you, but to reflect your state. And the deeper truth is this: everything around you is responding to what you allow yourself to become. You don't manifest from your preferences. You manifest from your permission. You've been taught to think of your desires as wild fantasies or spiritual indulgences. But what if they're coordinates? What if they're the whispers of a future version of you, reaching back through the veil to activate the path? Not all desires are distractions. Some are directions. And the difference is vibrational. There are longings that come from lack, from wanting something to save you. And there are longings that come from resonance, from feeling the truth of something already alive inside you. The latter don't require grasping. They require alignment. And alignment is not about effort. It's about honesty. About asking, again and again, what state am I inhabiting right now? Not what are you thinking or doing or planning, but what are you vibrating? Because the field around you, the one you keep hoping will notice you, only responds to that dot. And yet, this isn't about becoming some perfectly calibrated being who never doubts, never wavers, never flinches. That's not coherence. That's control in disguise. True coherence includes your humanity. It includes the wobble, the tears, the confusion. But it holds them inside a wider awareness, one that doesn't shame the fluctuation, but anchors. Through it, there's an intelligence to allowing your nervous system to feel without collapsing, to noticing the wave rise and saying, "Yes, I see you," without letting it become your identity. You've been taught to fear discomfort as a signal to stop, but often it's the signal that you're stretching, that your inner frequency is recalibrating. Like a radio adjusting to a new station, sometimes there's static before there's sound. Sometimes the signal feels faint. But your job is not to force the music louder. It's to stay tuned in long enough to hear it. And what begins to emerge from that kind of listening is subtle, but undeniable. A kind of inner steadiness, a quiet magnetism. You walk into rooms differently, not louder, not flashier, but clearer. You stop bending your energy to make others comfortable. You stop explaining your softness as weakness. You start making decisions from alignment, not urgency. And from that place, life responds. Not with fireworks, but with fidelity. The right people begin to find you, not because you chase them, but because your field became recognizable. The right opportunities begin to swirl, not because you forced them into shape, but because you became a match. And the more you experience this, the more you begin to trust it. The less you need proof, the more you rely on your inner barometer. Does this feel like truth? Does this feel like expansion? Does this resonate? And if it doesn't, you let it pass. Not out of ego, but out of knowing. Still, the world will tempt you to forget. It will ask you to measure your worth in metrics, in output, in speed. It will reward your exhaustion and call it success. It will distract you with noise and then shame you for being overwhelmed. And so the work, the real work, is not to escape the world, but to stay sovereign within it. To walk through the marketplace with a quiet center. To hear the chaos without absorbing it. To participate in the dance of life without losing your own rhythm. And this requires vigilance, not the tense kind, but the gentle kind. The kind that notices when your breath gets shallow, when your mind starts spiraling, when your choices start bending toward fear, and instead of spiraling further, you pause, you breathe, you recalibrate, you return, again and again. That's mastery, not perfection, but presence. Presence is what changes everything. It's what makes the ordinary feel like ritual. It's what turns a conversation into communion. It's what allows a single moment to be enough. You begin to notice the way light moves through leaves, the way your coffee tastes on a quiet morning, the way your own breath softens when you stop trying to edit yourself mid-thought. You stop needing to narrate your life to feel it. You stop needing to post about your joy to validate it. You stop performing your awakening and start embodying it. And that embodiment, that's what people feel. Even when you say nothing, especially when you say nothing. The most powerful frequency is not the loudest. It's the most stable, the most rooted, the most quietly aware. And in that awareness, new questions begin to rise. Not how do I get there, but what do I need to release to already be there? Not what's wrong with me, but what's no longer true for me. Not what do they think, but what do I know? These questions don't come from insecurity. They come from return. From recognizing that most of the confusion you felt wasn't a lack of clarity, but an overload of noise. That the answers didn't disappear. They were simply drowned out by the static of trying to be everything for everyone. And now, you're quieting that static, not by muting the world, but by amplifying your own tone. By letting your frequency be the loudest sound in your field. That's not ego, that's remembrance. Because when you remember your own tone, your unique hum in the field of all things, life begins to organize around it. Not in the way your mind expects, but in the way your soul needs. Some things will fall away. Some people will drift. Some opportunities will collapse. And it will feel, at first, like loss. But it's alignment. What doesn't resonate must recalibrate or release. And that's not a punishment. That's a clearing. That's a preparation. For what? For resonance. For flow. For the life that can only build itself around truth, not performance. Around embodiment, not imagination. And you don't need to rush this. You don't need to brand it or announce it or prove it. You just need to feel it. Let the shift be cellular before it's visible. Let it hum beneath the surface until it becomes unshakable. And when the world asks, what's different about you? You won't need to explain. Your presence will already be the answer. This is the frequency of becoming, not something new, but something true. There is something profound about the moment. You realize you're no longer seeking permission to exist in your fullness. It doesn't arrive as fireworks or a grand proclamation. More often, it shows up quietly. You find yourself speaking with less apology. You breathe deeper in rooms that once made you shrink. You feel no urgency to explain your path to those who cannot yet see it. And something settles. It's not ego, it's frequency anchoring. That hum inside you grows steadier, deeper. It doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't demand validation. It just is. And in that isness, you begin to touch the real power. Not power over, but power from within, from essence, from source. This is what it means to walk with coherence, not as a role, not as a performance, but as an integrated being who remembers. You're no longer auditioning for belonging. You've remembered that you are the space others find safety in, simply by being aligned. And that kind of presence cannot be faked. It doesn't come from affirmations spoken through gritted teeth. It comes from unlearning everything that taught you had to earn love. But even here, at this more coherent threshold, old echoes return. A voice whispers, "Are you sure?" A situation invites you back into reaction. A person from your past appears just when you thought you'd closed that timeline. Don't mistake these as tests. They are calibrations. Not to prove yourself, but to fine-tune the version of you you're becoming. Every choice is an opportunity to broadcast a clearer frequency. Every response is a signal you send into the quantum field. This is who I am now. This is what I accept. This is how I walk. And as those choices accumulate, not from effort, but from integrity, you become impossible to misplace. Your timeline finds you, not as reward, but as reflection. The future no longer feels like a distant shore. It feels like the ground beneath your feet, arriving with every aligned step. And here's something the old paradigm never told you. When you stabilize your inner world, time softens. The delays you feared begin to dissolve. The waiting becomes woven with purpose. You begin to see the perfection in the timing you once doubted. You notice that the thing you thought you wanted was a bridge, not a destination. That your longing wasn't lack, it was guidance. That the detour held the exact medicine your soul required. You don't have to chase timing anymore. You become the timing. You create the conditions for your reality to arrive not by willing it into existence, but by receiving it into coherence. The quantum doesn't care about your calendar. It responds to your now, your actual vibrational now. Not what you say you want, but what your field says you're ready for. And you've begun to match that readiness, not in words, but in posture, in presence, in breath. That is the true readiness, not the checklist, but the beingness. Still, there's grief here. Quiet, dignified grief. For the versions of you that didn't know how to hold this. For the years spent chasing, shrinking, pretending. For the moments you betrayed your own knowing to stay safe. Honor that grief. Don't rush past it. It's sacred. It's not here to weigh you down. It's here to clear space. You don't evolve by bypassing your pain. You evolve by integrating it. You meet your old self, not with judgment, but with reverence. You thank them for surviving. You thank them for carrying the weight. And then you release them, gently, like shedding a layer of clothing that no longer fits the weather. Not because you hated it, but because you've outgrown it. And what's left is a rawness that's not fragile, but clean. A softness that's not weakness, but wisdom. And in that softness, life flows differently. You attract not from need, but from overflow. You move not to be seen, but because your movement is a message. You begin to feel the quantum field like a presence. Not abstract, not mystical, just real. You notice how thoughts ripple, how intention shapes, how your body reacts to environments before your mind interprets them. You stop separating science and soul. You stop dividing logic and love. You understand that energy isn't poetic metaphor. It's structure. It's information. It's the infrastructure of all creation. And your consciousness is the conductor. The clearer you become, the more symphonic the response. You become aware of the feedback loop. What you emit returns, not as punishment or reward, but as resonance. You don't chase alignment. You create it. You don't wait for clarity. You become it. Not through effort, but through allowing, through resting into your own signal without flinching. And something wild happens when you stop flinching. You begin to see reality as an ally. Not always comfortable, not always predictable, but deeply intelligent. You begin to trust that when something exits, something else is being made ready. That when the door closes, the echo isn't silence. It's the vibration clearing for a cleaner signal. You don't need to know the full plan. You just need to anchor the truth in this moment. That truth becomes the magnet. And what you thought would take years collapses into now. Not because you found the shortcut, but because you became the frequency that no longer required delay. And when that happens, when enough of these moments compound, something crystallizes. You no longer doubt your signal. You no longer wobble when the old world pokes at you. You no longer contort to be understood. You simply hum. You become one of those beings who feels like home, not because they fix others, but because they remind others what alignment feels like. You walk with precision, not urgency. You speak with clarity, not explanation. You hold space without leaking energy. And people notice, not always consciously, but something about you makes them breathe deeper. Something about you reminds them of themselves. That is your real influence. Not the number of followers, not the spotlight, but the invisible invitation your being extends. Return to your own signal. Remember your original tone. Reclaim your coherence. And if this feels like a lot, let it be gentle. You're not behind. You're not late. You're not broken. You're becoming. And becoming doesn't always feel graceful. Sometimes it feels like unraveling. Sometimes it feels like standing still while the world spins. Sometimes it feels like you're losing everything, when really, you're being emptied so you can finally hold what's true. Trust that. Trust the stillness. Trust the fatigue. Trust the strange calm that arrives when you stop grasping. These are signs, not symptoms. This is arrival, not absence, because eventually you'll look around and realize the life you thought you had to fight for is now simply surrounding you. Not because you forced it, but because you finally matched it. You didn't chase your destiny. You remembered how to hold it. You didn't demand a miracle. You became the condition where miracles land. And that is the real shift. Not outer success, but inner stability. Not momentary highs, but anchored coherence. Not noise, but tone dot, and from here, everything recalibrates. The timelines realign, the codes activate, the field reorganizes. Not because you became someone else, but because you remembered who you already were. It starts to feel different now, not just in your thoughts, but in the architecture of your days. Subtle shifts that others might dismiss as coincidence now register as confirmation. You wake and notice that you no longer reach for your phone first. You speak and realize your tone has softened without effort. You enter a space and instead of reading the room to adapt, you feel the room adapting around your presence. You're not becoming arrogant. You're becoming sovereign. And in that sovereignty, there is no loudness, no force, only gravity. A subtle pull of authenticity that doesn't seduce, but invites. That doesn't demand attention, but creates an environment where others remember their own depth just by being near you. You've become that kind of frequency, the kind that stabilizes not by advice, but by embodiment. Not by saying, "Look what I've become," but by silently showing it's safe to remember who you are. You're no longer in search of the next secret. You've realized the most ancient truths don't need discovery. They need integration. And so you spend less time trying to awaken and more time practicing wakefulness. Less time chasing purpose, and more time becoming a clear vessel for presence itself. And yet, this doesn't make life frictionless. The old programming doesn't die politely. It lingers. It rears up in moments when you are tired, when you are doubting, when the world gets loud. But now, something new happens. You recognize it. You no longer confuse the fear with truth. You feel the contraction and name it for what it is. An echo, not a prophecy. A memory of protection, not a signal of danger. And in that recognition, you choose again. You don't numb the fear. You don't shame it. You don't make a ceremony out of banishing it. You simply breathe, soften, and return to resonance. That return is what rewires you. Not dramatic acts of rebellion, but consistent acts of remembrance. You remember that you are not your survival instincts. You are not your roles. You are not the approval you seek. You are the awareness behind the seeking. You are the signal that remained, even when the noise tried to bury it. And now, that signal is growing stronger, not by volume, but by purity. You are no longer broadcasting distortion. You are transmitting coherence. And that coherence creates portals, pathways, not just for yourself, but for others. You'll begin to notice it in your relationships. The way some conversations feel electric, not because of their topic, but because of the shared resonance beneath them. The way silence becomes safe, even sacred. The way you no longer tolerate dynamics that deplete you. The way people who once triggered collapse now meet a new version of you, not armored, but rooted. Not defensive, but unshakable. You realize you don't need to fight for your boundaries when your energy makes them unmistakable. You don't need to explain your worth when your nervous system already holds it as truth. You don't need to perform love to receive it, because you've remembered how to be the source of it. And when that happens, everything else becomes easier to discern. You stop asking, is this what I deserve? And start asking, does this match the frequency I live in now? That question becomes your compass, not from superiority, but from integrity. Because now you understand that love is not a transaction, it's a transmission. And you are no longer broadcasting desperation. You are broadcasting clarity. And that clarity changes how you move through time. You stop projecting into the future with panic. You stop dissecting the past for meaning. You meet the moment, not because it's perfect, but because it's the only place truth can breathe. You find joy in the texture of the present, the way sunlight slants across your desk, the way water sounds when it moves through your hands, the feeling of a deep exhale after a hard truth is spoken. These are not distractions. These are anchors. The quantum doesn't open through intensity. It opens through intimacy. And intimacy requires slowness, stillness, soft attention. This is not about escaping the matrix. This is about harmonizing with a reality that moves at the speed of presence. And presence is what allows the quantum to respond, not to your demands, but to your state. What you are being is always more powerful than what you are doing. And when your being stabilizes into truth, the field rearranges around it like a tide finding its coastline. No noise, no storm, just inevitability. You start to feel the sacred in places you used to rush through. In the pause before you answer. In the breath you take before making a decision. In the moment you say no without apology, or yes without seeking permission. These small choices become initiations, not because they are grand, but because they are honest. Honesty is your new ritual, not bluntness, not performance, just the clear, coherent expression of what is real in you. And when you live that way, you become a rare frequency in a world addicted to simulation. You become a quiet revolution, not loud, not violent, but seismic. Because now, you're not just talking about change. You are the changed environment through which new realities emerge. This is when you understand. Embodiment is not about arriving. It's about returning. Again and again. Even after you've slipped. Even after you've forgotten. Even after you've gotten pulled back into loops that no longer serve you. You return, not with shame, but with reverence. You return to your breath, to your tone, to your truth. And each return makes the memory stronger. Each return becomes a thread in the new pattern, until eventually the new way becomes the only way you know how to move. Not because you're trying, but because you've remembered how to be. And that remembering isn't linear. It spirals. You revisit lessons you thought you'd mastered. You meet emotions you thought you'd outgrown. But now, you meet them differently, with presence, with awareness, with compassion. And in that compassion, there is no regression, only refinement. Your frequency sharpens. Your tone purifies. And the quantum, always listening, begins to offer reflections that match your refinement. This is not reward. This is resonance. You're not earning blessings. You're becoming a space where blessings recognize themselves. By now, something has softened in you. Maybe it's the tension in your jaw, the tightness in your chest, the gripping around how it's supposed to go. You're not surrendered in defeat. You're surrendered in recognition that life was never asking you to master control. It was asking you to master signal. And that signal, the one only you can emit, is no longer distorted. It's becoming clear, strong, undeniable, not because of effort, but because of trust. And trust is the final unlock, not because it guarantees outcomes, but because it stabilizes presence. And from presence, all things unfold. Something begins to happen in the stillness, not the kind of stillness that feels like waiting, but the kind that feels like remembering. A spaciousness opens in your being, not an empty void, but a fertile one. You begin to sense that nothing needs to be added to you in order to become who you already are. In fact, every layer you've peeled back, every identity you've shed, every outdated belief you've dissolved, has only brought you closer to the truth that was always pulsing beneath. That truth is not loud. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply vibrates. And now, you are no longer resisting that vibration. You are becoming it. With every breath, you stop reaching outside of yourself for the answers that were written into your awareness from the beginning. You feel the dissonance between who you were told to be and who you've always known yourself to be slowly resolving. The friction between effort and embodiment, between performing and radiating, between surviving and transmitting, it's easing. Not because you forced it, but because you've softened into your original tone. That tone is your true language. Not the one you speak with words, but the one you emit in silence. And silence, when filled with frequency, becomes music. It becomes magnetic. And the quantum field responds not to your sentences, but to your song. And in that song, something else stirs, vision. But not the kind of vision that clings to goals or timelines. This vision moves differently. It's not linear, but spherical. You begin to see not just what's possible, but what's probable when you live as your true signal. The question is no longer, how do I make this happen? But how do I stay stable in the state where this already exists? And from that state, clarity emerges. Ideas land not with urgency, but with resonance. Opportunities appear not from hustle, but from harmonic alignment. You feel a frequency pull, a deep gravitational yes in your body, when something matches your internal state. And when it doesn't, you feel no need to chase or fix. You bless it and release it, because now you understand. Anything that requires distortion of your truth to maintain will never lead to coherence. And coherence is your new compass. not as a concept, but as a state, not a destination, but a design. And you've remembered how to design with your being. There's a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes seismic, where you realize you've stopped measuring your life by outer metrics. You stop checking your growth against someone else's timeline. You stop craving visibility as a substitute for visibility within. You start to live from a place so rooted in internal permission that even silence feels rich. Even solitude feels full. Even stillness feels alive. You realize that you no longer need to be seen to be valid because you are seeing yourself more clearly than ever. And from that recognition, the universe takes its cue. It doesn't mirror your potential. It mirrors your embodiment of it. You become the living signal of the reality you once thought you had to earn. And in becoming it, you no longer doubt its arrival. Because it's not arriving, it's being revealed. And as more is revealed, you begin to touch a new relationship. With time, you no longer live in anxiety loops of what if or desperation loops of when. You live in presence loops of now. Now is where alignment vibrates. Now is where frequency stabilizes. Now is where the quantum opens. You've stopped asking time to validate you. You've stopped asking the future to rescue you. You realize you've always been your own convergence point. That the timeline you desired wasn't far away. It was simply vibrating at a level you weren't yet safe enough to hold. And now, by regulating your nervous system, by letting go of urgency, by listening instead of chasing, you've raised your capacity. You can hold more now. You can allow more now. You can receive more now. Not because you changed the world, but because you changed your state. And state is what creates the texture of reality. But even in this expanded state, you're not immune to the pull of old patterns. They arrive like familiar ghosts, invitations back into contraction, fear, comparison. But now you don't panic. You don't spiral. You witness. You breathe. You anchor. You hold your own frequency without abandoning yourself. That's what it means to lead with energy. Not to force others to match you, but to refuse to betray yourself in order to match them. This is the shift from reaction to regulation, from adaptation to alignment. And it's here, in this deeper regulation, that your field becomes a transmitter of truth, not a reflection of the noise. People feel you now, not your words, but your signal. And when your signal is coherent, it speaks louder than any branding, any message, any strategy. It says, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I allow. And the quantum listens, not because it's judging, but because it's harmonizing dot, and so life begins to harmonize too. Your routines become rituals. Your boundaries become embodied. Your decisions become declarations of frequency. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving. You stop begging energy to stay. Instead, you cultivate what is yours. You protect your resonance like sacred ground. You treat your attention like the currency that funds your future. You pour yourself into what nourishes you, not out of obligation, but out of awareness. That's the new paradigm. Not martyrdom, not exhaustion, not constant striving, but alignment, clarity, and coherence. Not perfection, but presence. Not performance, but power that whispers, I remember who I am. And remembering who you are doesn't mean rejecting who you've been. It means integrating every fragment, every detour, every shadow into a single tone that no longer wavers. It means recognizing that the version of you that longed for this wasn't wrong. They were early. And now, you are the fulfilled frequency of that longing. You are the prayer answered in the form of presence. You are no longer waiting for the light. You've become the channel through which light remembers how to move dot, so you wait differently. You walk differently. You speak with care, not because you fear judgment, but because you understand vibration. You understand that every sentence casts a shape into the field. Every emotion builds a bridge or a barrier. Every choice either strengthens or distorts your signal. And you choose now, not from fear, not from approval seeking, but from alignment. That's the new rhythm, not the rhythm of strategy, but the rhythm of self. And even when the world around you forgets, even when chaos returns, even when the old paradigms scream louder, you remain. You breathe, you ground, you emit. Because coherence doesn't need conditions to remain steady. It creates conditions through its steadiness. And now you know how to hold it. Not as a concept, but as a current. A hum that began in silence and has now become your song. There's a rare stillness that arrives when you've moved beyond performance. Not the stillness of waiting, but of arrival. A soft, luminous awareness that hums through your limbs like you finally stepped inside. The version of yourself that was always whispering from just beyond the veil. This is not the end of your journey. It's the end of distortion. The end of shrinking to fit rooms you've already outgrown. The end of performing identities that once protected you, but now keep you small. You no longer seek safety by mimicking the patterns of the world around you. You generate safety by vibrating from your own internal architecture. And that architecture is no longer cracked by doubt or fogged by external expectations. It is intact. It is clear. It is sacred. You've stopped chasing outcomes because you finally understand. Outcomes are the echo, not the source. You are the source. And your inner coherence, the harmony between thought, breath, choice, and being, is what bends probability. The more clearly you live that truth, the more softly reality rearranges itself to meet you, like morning light bending across the floor without needing permission. This is where you begin to access a different kind of knowing, one that doesn't use logic as its foundation, but resonance. You walk into a space and feel the energy before a word is spoken. You listen to someone's tone and recognize the frequency behind the words. You begin to decode the field, not as a spiritual exercise, but as your native language returning. Your body becomes the instrument of knowing. Goosebumps become confirmation. Tension becomes a request to pause. Your breath patterns become messages. Your emotional wave becomes an internal navigation system. You've stopped asking for signs in the sky and started listening to the ones that ripple through your chest. This is intelligence beyond intellect. It's not better, just deeper, more embodied, more honest, more available in the present moment than any plan ever could be. And the more you trust it, the less you need to prepare. Not because you're reckless, but because you're tuned. You've trained your field to vibrate in alignment with truth, and so truth arrives faster, with less friction, because the signal is no longer tangled in static dot. And yes, the world around you may not understand this new rhythm. Some people will project onto your calm, mistaking it for avoidance. Others will poke at your boundaries, interpreting your silence as permission to pull you back into old cycles. But now you know the difference between peace and passivity, between compassion and compliance, between love and self-abandonment. You don't fight back with fury. You hold your field. You anchor your tone. You become the unshakable presence that teaches through vibration. That's the quiet revolution. You don't argue with chaos. You outstabilize it. You don't convince people to see you. You become so visible to yourself that nothing external can distort your signal. This is how you become a portal, not by preaching a new path, but by living it so clearly that others feel the blueprint awaken in their own body. You are not a teacher in the traditional sense. You are a tuning fork. And simply by being, you remind others what coherence sounds like. And within all this, the frequency, the clarity, the field, there is still softness. You are not a stone tower. You are not armored with enlightenment. You feel everything, but from a place of regulation. You cry, but you don't collapse. You ache, but you don't identify as the ache. You allow the full spectrum without needing to fix or escape it. And that allowance, that permission, makes your frequency magnetic, not to attention, but to truth. Truth recognizes itself. And the truth is, your presence is a signal that the new paradigm is not coming. It's here. In you. You're not waiting for the collective to catch up. You are stabilizing the grid now. With every breath you take that doesn't abandon your center. With every choice you make that aligns with your nervous system, not just your ambition. With every relationship you refine by choosing honesty over harmony. You are living the new story, not talking about it. Living it, and living it means trusting the space between manifestations. It means not collapsing into fear when you're in the void. It means knowing that the field is always listening, even when it's quiet. Especially when it's quiet. You've stopped mistaking silence for stagnation. You've started recognizing silence as the recalibration phase, the womb of the new, the sacred pause where seeds crack open beneath the soil. And so you rest without guilt. You slow down without fear. You prioritize presence over productivity because you understand now the frequency of how you do something shapes what it becomes. There are no neutral actions. Every movement emits tone, and your tone is now refined, gentle, unmistakable, unhurried. You move like someone who trusts their timing because you're no longer outsourcing your rhythm to the world. You've remembered the internal drumbeat that was always playing beneath, the noise, and you've noticed something else, haven't you? The way synchronicities don't surprise you anymore. The way time bends around your decisions. The way ideas arrive fully formed, as if whispered from a future self who already lived. The timeline you're just now stepping into. That's not magic. That's coherence meeting permission. That's the quantum bending around clarity. You don't manifest faster because you're better. You manifest cleaner because you're aligned. And in that alignment, you don't need to force life. You simply meet it where it already is, at your frequency dot. And now you understand why it all had to unfold the way it did, why the delays were sacred, why the breakdowns were catalysts, why the relationships that fell away were coded exits from outdated timelines. You don't resent the past anymore. You bow to it. You don't try to erase it. You alchemize it. Every version of you, even the ones wrapped in fear and confusion, was an echo of the one you are now. And this version, this coherent, breathing, grounded being, is not the end result. It's the beginning, the foundation, the activated tone from which a completely new reality can grow. And it will grow, not with struggle, not with force, but with the same quiet inevitability that brought you here. The same whisper that once felt like curiosity and now feels like truth. The same call that echoed across timelines and finally landed in your chest. And now you're not asking, how do I create the life I want? You're asking, how do I stay deeply rooted in the version of me that already lives it? And from that question, everything flows. Not because you've mastered the law of attraction, but because you've stopped contradicting your own signal. You've stopped broadcasting doubt beneath declarations of hope. You've stopped leaking energy trying to convince others of what you can now simply be. And when you be, cleanly, calmly, clearly, the field listens. The field adjusts. The field reflects. You are not separate from the field. You are its pulse. You are the convergence point where awareness and form meet to dance in patterns the mind could never calculate, but the heart always knew. And so, here you are, not at the end, not at the beginning, but at the frequency where past and future dissolve into presence. You are holding a tone that many still fear to hear, not because it's loud, but because it's true. And truth, when embodied, becomes unmistakable. It doesn't need to explain itself. It simply radiates. That is what you are now. A being of coherence. A transmission of truth. A portal to what was always waiting to be remembered. And now, as the frequencies settle and your breath returns to the rhythm of stillness, you realize there's nothing more to chase, only more to remember. You're no longer the seeker. You are the signal. The old urgency has quieted, not because everything has been solved, but because something deeper has been reclaimed, your tone. Your presence is no longer scattered across 100 timelines. It's here, embodied, coherent, calm. The version of you who once questioned, hesitated, reached, bless them. They carried you to this moment. And now, this moment carries you forward. Without force, without doubt, just resonance. So let this stillness stretch. Let it echo. Let it speak for you in the hours to come. And when the world grows noisy again, come back here, not just to these words, but to your own signal. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. Other stories are waiting for you, but for now, this one is complete. You are home.